All right, Matt Hill here from MRU, the curriculum designer, back here with day 4. Now, day 4 is, in my opinion, probably the best day. A lot of fun, a lot of great stuff. Now, it is long though, so you may see places you would want to cut things, or you may say, "Oh, I like that. I'm not going to use that." So you could think of this as sort of, everything you can do, and you can pare it back. And I'll sort of highlight those spots as we go through. All right. And so the idea with this day is we're going to cover that fourth tool, coordinating expectations. That'll come at the end, but really just try to drive home the importance of getting that monetary policy right. Because I mean, I think the words monetary policy, it's just like everyone's brain shuts off. Oh, monetary policy, who cares? Oh my gosh, so complicated. Teachers hate teaching it, students hate learning it. So we're trying to be like, look, this is super important. All right. So hopefully we've done some fun stuff thus far, had some fun videos, had some fun interactives, but really we're trying to get students to walk away from this thinking like, okay, this is something I should care about. Now they probably won't care about it, because whatever, they're 15, they're 16, but that's the idea. Okay, so the bell ringer, we're going to be like, all right, what do you think happened in each of these pictures? What do you think the problem was in each of these pictures? Okay, so we have Venezuelan migrants swarming the border, like trying to leave Venezuela. We have hungry children picking rice off the street that they're so hungry. This happened in Zimbabwe in 2008. We have these Argentinian protests in 2021, people camping out to protest. So what is the cause of all this? Why are these people, why are these disasters in each of these countries? Okay. Was it famine? Was it extreme weather? Was there a political coup? What is going on? Now, maybe the students will have guessed, you could take the guesses from the students. Maybe you've guessed what the answer is. It's monetary policy. So, I mean, you can have bad monetary policy. You can have dire consequences for your population. All right. So what can go wrong? Okay. So the central bank of a country can, buy these assets from the banks, but where does the central bank get the money? Like, where does the central bank, like, they're buying all these assets from the from banks. Where's the central bank get the money? And the answer is most central banks have a money printer. Okay. And so this is a fun meme from the internet. There's all different versions of the meme, but broadly, with fiat currency, where there's nothing hard backing the currency, essentially a government and the central bank can create currency out of thin air. And so this is obviously very tempting. You can just push a button and out comes money. What are you going to do? And you can ask your students what they would do. You got a money printer at home. What are you doing with it? All right. And I would imagine the response you'll get is, I'm hitting that button all the time. And so it takes great restraint at the country level to not hit that button all the time, because if you do hit that button all the time, something bad is going to happen. So if you've covered inflation previously, and if you haven't, we have a great unit plan covering inflation. So what happens is you print that money, you get more and more money out there. Well, that's going to lower the value of the money. If you flood the market with something, it's not going to be as valuable. So if you flood the market with your money, initially it's going to be a lot of fun. Initially, when you're printing that money, it's going to be a lot of fun. You're buying this, you're buying that, but eventually your money is going to be devalued, and it can get so severe that your currency is worthless. Okay, in that Zimbabwe example, here's the Zimbabwe $100 trillion bill. In Zimbabwe, when they had their hyperinflation, basically that's the prices are shooting up. When prices are shooting up, what that means is the dollars are worth less and less and less. And so we have these that we often give out. We at MRU as prizes, these Zimbabwe bills, because they're great, because they're actual money, and it's like, oh, $100 trillion or $20 billion. And they're a great way to teach inflation. But obviously, if you're living through it, it's a real tragedy. And actually in Venezuela, when you would go into the bathroom, there would be signs, please don't use the currency as toilet paper. Please don't use Zimbabwe dollars as toilet paper. And that's how valueless they became. So if you overuse your powers of the money printer, you'll essentially collapse your economy. And that's what happened in each of those previous examples that we showed. So here we go. Here's the graph with the picture. Here's that Zimbabwe money supply. This is the government printing up all that money. This is the result, starving children. Okay? Here's Argentina printing up all that money. The result, mass protests. Okay, actually, go back. Sorry, I missed the slide. Here's Venezuela printing up all that money. The result, everyone's leaving Venezuela. I mean, I think they lost like 30% or more of their population due to this disaster. So, I mean, we're not talking about a mini disaster. I mean, we're talking about an utter collapse of the country if you get monetary policy wrong. So hopefully these pictures drive home how important it is. And hopefully we've done a good job of sort of connecting that money supply to the picture for y'all. All right, so that's the bell ringer. Hopefully people are on the edge of the seats. Oh my goodness, this is super important. Okay. And then we're going to finish up. We got a video. So now we're going to finish up that economist video from yesterday. So if you start this, it'll start already sort of in the middle, and it'll go over the end of the video, which establishes or reinforces this, what we talked about, and then emphasizes the importance of that central bank independence. Okay. So when you have a central bank, it needs to be independent from the government, because a lot of politicians will have very short-term goals. And remember, when you're pressing the money printer, it can be great in the short run, but in the long run, it'll be bad. So a lot of politicians will have short-term goals. Their goal is to get elected in the next cycle, right? Or look good for the election cycle. Well, the central bank has to be independent and take the long view and tell the politicians, no, we're not going to print the money, because we're concerned about the long run health of the nation. Now, importantly, when you're fighting inflation, so when you have that inflation going up, what you need to do is contract the money supply, basically the opposite of the money printer. You need to vacuum the money up to make the money more valuable. And the way the central bank does this, as we've covered last lecture, is to raise the interest rate. And this is not popular. I mean, right now we have increased interest rates. Obviously, nobody likes it. All right. Oh, higher interest rates, harder to get money. My house price is going down. The value of my house is going down. And so, and people who are buying houses even like, oh, the high interest rates, I can't afford to buy a house. So, generally nobody likes higher interest rates. And so the moves to fight inflation are oftentimes unpopular. And so the center is very critical for the central bank to be independent. And so we have this nice graph that shows this point. As you get more independent, your inflation gets lower. So, you have central banks that aren't independent. You can see they have on average higher inflation. All right. So hopefully this little correlation here, or this little fun graph, will make that point nicely. Now we go into more depth in the US case. And this slide talks about the structure of the Fed and how it is designed to try to be independent. It's budgets not set by Congress. There's a board of governors where they serve staggered terms. So no administration basically can pack that board. And so the chairman of the Fed comes from that board of governors. And so it's theoretically separated from sort of the short-term goals of the legislature and the executive branch. Okay. Then we go even more, how power is widely distributed. We have the board of governors. We have these reserve banks. So there's 12 regional banks. And then you have an open market committee made up of the board of governors, the NY Reserve Bank president, and rotating bank presidents. And so, these are all sort of the decision makers. And so there is the chairperson of the Federal Reserve. They're very powerful, obviously, but they're not like sole power. They don't have like complete power. There are some checks and balances. Okay. So we've covered kind of the dangers of monetary policy. We've talked about, all right, it's independent. And that's important for establishing the credibility of your central bank. And having a credible central bank is very important for our fourth tool, which is coordinating expectations. Okay. So what does that mean? Is that oftentimes the Fed can control the economy or manage the economy simply by communicating. And so if the Fed or the central bank is credible just by communicating, they can often achieve their ends. So they can say, okay, we are going to raise rates. And then everyone will think, oh, the Fed is going to raise rates. Interest rates are going to go up. I should constrain my spending now. So just by communicating, they've already lowered aggregate demand. Or they can say, oh, there's, if there's a recession, don't worry, we're going to lower rates, we're going to get the money out in the economy. And people could say, okay, the Fed is acting, the Fed's doing something. All right, this isn't so bad, And so that credibility, and just by communicating, the Fed can basically affect the course of the economy. This is why I mentioned, most monetary policy units don't cover this coordinating expectations. But the reason we have it is we think it's really important because it's a lot of what the Fed does. What the Fed actually is doing day to day is a lot of communication, basically trying to, assuage people's fear. We saw this in 2003 with the banking crisis with Silicon Valley Bank. A lot of that was they're communicating, don't worry, everything's fine. We got this because they're trying to manage that contagion. So, there's no like math here or anything like that. And so, other unit plans or AP might not have it, but in terms of the real world, the day-to-day, this coordinating expectations, setting expectations, the credibility of the central bank, that's super, super important. So that's why we have it. Okay. Now, this is an art. This is, we say at the bottom of the slide, this is an art, as well as a science. I mean, we've talked about moving interest rates. That's very, scientific, measuring the economy, that's scientific, but it is an art because everyone knows the central bank is very important. And so if the central bank comes out and says, oh, wow, everything sure is terrible right now. Oh, yeah, the economy is definitely going to crash. Everyone's going to panic. So they're like, oh, the central bank thinks they're bad, So even in the 2008 crisis, remember if you're maybe depending on your age, if you remember the 2008 crisis, well, it was really bad. Banks were failing. The economy was contracting. The stock market's plummeting. The Fed had to go out there. Oh, don't worry. Hey, we got this. They can't be like, oh, things are sure looking bad, guys. So they can't. And so, but sometimes that's what the data is saying. But they can't tell the truth in that setting, because if they tell the truth, people will panic. So it's a bit of an art, and the Fed has to be very measured in their talk. And so this kind of measured, dry, vague manner of communicating, but still communicating, there is a word for it. It's called fedspeak. So fedspeak is basically refers to this sort of dry manner, robotic manner of communicating. And now we can have some fun with that fedspeak. So because of these fun AIs that we have now, like ChatGPT or the other ones, you can actually ask the AI to talk in fedspeak. So we've done that here with ChatGPT. So we've put in some famous, we put in the Gettysburg Address, and we said, hey, ChatGPT, can you take this but rewrite it as if the Fed was saying it? And so we see, it's pretty fun. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. So that's the Gettysburg Address. And then you hear, if the Fed were doing it, approximately 87 fiscal periods prior, the founding entities initiated a novel sovereign entity within this geographic jurisdiction. So you can see it all here. We have Taylor Swift, the Taylor Swift song, "We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together." If the Fed wrote that song, the Fed would say, upon careful analysis of historical data and current indicators, the committee has reached a decision that the conditions for re-engagement are structurally unsound. As such, the long-term outlook indicates a low probability of policy reversal towards reunification. All right. So this is fun. We have the knock-knock joke. We have a classic knock-knock joke as if the Fed wrote it. So again, this is just to interject some lightheartedness into a dry topic that doesn't have to be dry. Hopefully you found this unit not as dry. All right. And if you have time, so again, as I mentioned, this one's a little long. So if you have time, the students can play around with it, where they, and if they have access to ChatGPT or whatever, Bard or whatever else, the students can play around with the AI and ask them, hey, can you write this in fedspeak? Whatever song they like, whatever movie they like, movie quotes, hey, write this in fedspeak. And you can take some class time to just have fun with getting ChatGPT to rewrite things in fedspeak. I mean, I know we had fun doing this. Okay. All right. So, we've had our bell ringer, important to monetary policy. We've had a video, nice video. We've sort of done a little bit of lecturing. We've talked about the independence and coordinating expectations. Now we're going to end with a bit of an activity. Again, this, if you if you have time, and this activity is rather long, so there's going to be 5 scenarios. You can pick out 3, you could do 2, you could do 1, you can not do it. We're just sort of giving you, the longer version, and you can do your director's cut. Okay, all right. So the scenario 1 is in 1931. There's the Great Depression. Real incomes are declining. There's a banking crisis. What should the Fed do? You should ask your students, what should the Fed do? Should they act as the lender of last resort, or should they let the banks fail? Your students should hopefully pick A. And then we say, all right, but what really happened is, well, the Fed picked B, and we had a bunch of banks failing, and the Depression continued. The money supply contracted even further. And then here we have Ben Bernanke. So it's interesting. I mean, this is sort of a bit of a side note. Ben Bernanke was chairman of the Fed. So he was in charge of our central bank in 2008 during the financial crisis. What's interesting about him is before he was the chairman, he was an academic who studied the Great Depression. And so it's a bit like a scientist who studies what to do when an asteroid hits, and then there's an asteroid coming for the US, and the government's like, all right, hey, you're the expert on asteroids, hop to it, fix that. It's like, hey, Ben Bernanke, you're the expert on Great Depressions. We got another one coming at us with this great financial crisis. Can you fix it? And basically, he had to apply the lessons of the Great Depression to the Great Recession in the hopes that it did not become a Great Depression. All right. Scenario 2, mid-1979, we have this really bad inflation. Inflation's almost up to 10%. We have a new Fed chairman, Paul Volcker. What should he do? Constrain the money supply or expand the money supply? Now, the right one is to constrain the money supply. Okay. And that's exactly what Volcker did. And here we're emphasizing the importance of the independence of the Fed, because this was not a popular policy. I mean, people literally delivered bricks, in front of his office. This is not how unpopular he was, but the conventional wisdom is that he was able to sort of break the back of inflation and finally bring inflation down in the U.S. All right, scenario 3. It's 2022. You are the president of Turkey's central bank. We have really high inflation. The president is pressuring you to lower interest rates, not increase interest rates. What do you want to do? Raise or lower rates? Now, the correct answer here is you want to raise your rates to try to bring that inflation under control, but it's tough because you have to deal with a president who doesn't like you. And so if you're not independent enough and the president can replace you, which is what happened, then you basically you can't do what you're supposed to do. All right, scenario 4. It's mid-1994, and you are in Brazil. There's really, really bad inflation. What do you do? Do you do a price freeze? Do you announce a fake currency, or do you launch a military coup? This is a bit of a fun one, kind of a trick one. Now, the answer is B. All right. And this is a great story. I think we have it in the additional resources. But basically what happened is the inflation was so bad that the population had lost faith in the currency. And so just correct monetary policy wasn't enough. Yeah, you can, you can raise interest rates. You can constrain the money supply, but the population has just lost complete faith in the currency. So even if you do the right thing, it's still not going to work because the people are just going to be like, this thing's worthless. And so what they actually had to do was introduce a whole new currency, basically saying, look, we got this new currency that's not going to have inflation. And they sort of rolled it out slowly. So they would show prices in it. And then eventually they released the currency. They showed stable prices in it for a while. And then they released the currency. Okay. All right. So that was kind of a fun one. And it just, again, shows the importance of those expectations that the public has to believe that you are credible. All right. Now, last one we have as sort of hey, the real world's tough. So the economy is stagnant in Japan. What should we do? Keep lowering the rate, or should we buy assets from the banks? Okay. So there's not really a wrong answer here. These are both sort of expansionary monetary policy to try to get the economy moving. In the real world, this is just showing how complicated it is, because basically that's what Japan did. So Japan lowered rates, Didn't really work. People weren't willing to, basically people kept saving even when the rates were low, and it led to this lost decade. Now, finally, they moved to sort of a quantitative easing model where they're buying assets up, trying to get more money out there. And then the results are mixed. Some economists think this jolted Japan out of the doldrums. Some say it had limited effect. The whole point of this is just like, it's complicated. Hey, sometimes there's nothing you can do. Sometimes we think, hey, the central bank has all this power, but in some cases, even if they're doing the right things, it's not going to work. There are broader forces at play. All right. Our exit ticket. Would you like to be in charge of the Federal Reserve? Why or not? Why not? Now, hopefully we've emphasized in this lesson plan the importance of that with that bell ringer, the difficulties of it with that coordinating expectations. You have these political pressures. You can't tell the whole truth because you don't want to scare people sometimes. You have to do this Fed speak. So yes, it's super important and it's a very powerful job. So that may be appealing to people, but it is a very, very difficult job. And so hopefully we've conveyed that in the middle and then with those real scenarios at the end. All right. Big day. Like I say, pick what you want from it. Hopefully there's lots of fun stuff. Like I said, this is one of my favorite days with the Fed speak and all these real scenarios and those great examples in the beginning.
You can get the monetary policy unit plan here or click for the next video.